Okay. Yeah, that's right now, that sounds better. Okay, this meeting will come to order. And everybody has an agenda, and we have approval of minutes from 2:20, 3:12, and 4:23. Has everybody had a chance to take a look at them?
Yes.
Okay. I have a motion.
Make a motion to approve the minutes. Second.
Any discussion? Was that one that we were concerned about? It's not finished, right?
Yeah, so the two, I believe it's February, the early February one,
Yeah,
we
that-
switched over when we came into this room.
Yeah, but
I'm unable to find the recording to that, so.
Okay,
Up until that point, we have,
you have.
but you might want to table, I'm not sure what would be the best next.
So that would be what, the 220?
that would be the 212, I believe.
212, I thought so,
And
yeah.
we
That's
do
not-
have part of the draft that Ryan prepared.
Mm-hmm.
I had understood that there was a possibility that the so-called missing part of the session was actually on the recorder.
That's my understanding,
And
yes.
if that's the case, obviously, the best course, I would think, would be to make sure that Ryan can access it, have him prepare that part of the meeting as usual, and I will review and boil it down when he's done. If it is inaccessible, then I would ask people to check their own notes and see if they have any notes they took from the second part of that session. I have some memory of it, but I was relying, frankly, on the existing of a recording. And,
I'm confused because the 212 is missing, half of that meeting, because we're doing 220, 312, and 423.
I thought we had just approved those.
We didn't do the final vote on those. We were under discussion.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's
In that
okay.
case, I have no comments on these.
Okay, all right. And Ryan, these are all complete, these three?
Yeah,
These
so
are-
there's two. The earliest one, the one from the early February meeting,
220, where's 220?
not sure.
You have 226, Ryan.
There is no 220.
Yeah,
We-
February 26th is there, and that was for meeting, and then also with the, so those two, and then just the early February meeting, I believe it was.
Okay,
That's the one where I'm just unable to find, right now we're able to access. Or it could be I'm not familiar with the recorder, like the only one I see on there.
yes, she said she was gonna be here tonight, so she might be running late. 423 is here,
Yes,
okay. So we can vote on those,
yeah, I would table just the February.
okay. Well, we're not approving that, so February 9th will have to be a separate vote. Okay, so these three that we have here tonight, complete. Do I have a motion? Oh, we did that. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye, okay. And the February 9th,
Yeah.
we will have to
Yeah, my
do a
apologies.
motion to table because of, go ahead, Mimi.
Yeah, I'm actually looking at my notes now, and that is indeed 226. But otherwise, all of the comments apply, and I would move to table.
Okay, so the agenda's wrong, it should be 226.
Yeah, 226 is the one that I have only half of.
I think that the February 26th one is actually, I think it's February
Wait.
9th is the one.
Oh, all right.
It'll show on one of the only two pages, and it'll say,
So the agenda has 22018, but I think there's a typo, it should be 226.
Okay, all right, so let's change that to a 6. And that's the one,
Then,
okay, that's the one, it's 226 that we only have half of.
okay, then we need to revise our motion and table that
Yes, we
one.
do, because we're going to approve a motion for 312 and 423. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, those are complete. Then we'll have to table 226, have a motion to table 226.
So moved.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so that takes care of that. Update on draft preservation plan and et cetera. Roberta?
Thank you. I'm going to begin to talk about, so I have 3 documents that I've shared with you this week. They include, just to make sure that everybody has, because there was some confusion about the copies on the table, one that's called Application and Review Process for Holyoke CPAC. And this document is kind of intended as an instruction manual for the CPAC and your coordinator for going through your annual cycle. It begins with a schedule at the top, and then it has a 2-column with bullets, text for a couple of pages. And then there's the application packet, fiscal year 2018, and it ought to have a calendar on the first page, and then the last page looks like a form. If you have a document that has a form for the first page, put it aside. That's the last page. So the first page should look like this.
Stapled on the wrong side.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So that's
Yeah.
page
Yeah,
1.
okay.
So, just to make sure everyone has the right thing. And then the third document, which I will talk about first, is goals and priorities. So the goals and priorities are the final part of the plan proper. So the goals and priorities, so the first part of the plan that I sent to you earlier, a couple months ago, was the preliminary findings report, which has the existing conditions and the community needs assessment. And that's the first part of the plan, and then the last part of the plan is the goals and priorities. So I welcome still any feedback, if you have written feedback to send me about the preliminary findings report. If you'd like me to send you another copy of that electronically, just let me know, I'm happy to do so. And in the meantime, this evening, we can talk about the goals and priorities. I can walk you through what this document has, and then if you haven't had a chance to look at it before this evening, take it home, send me any notes and comments that you have. This goals and priorities is the most important part of the plan, because this is exactly what you're going to use to evaluate your future funding proposals. So when you receive a funding proposal, you'll go to this section of the plan and you'll compare that proposal to the overall priorities on the first page, and then to the goals and priorities that pertain to that program area. And you can also share this specific part of the plan with other boards and committees, with your stakeholder groups, with your prospective applicants, so that they understand on what basis you're going to make decisions about funding. So I can't emphasize enough how important it is that everybody be on the same page now about what should be in this section of the plan. So what we have, overall priorities. The overall goals for CPA funding are that the project should be highly visible and accessible, generating broad benefits to the community. Priority is given to projects that facilitate growth in Holyoke's tax base, either directly through investment in taxable property or indirectly through improvements that enhance a neighborhood or encourage private investment. Projects should be consistent with other city and regional plans, with priority given to projects that are part of a coordinated connecting vision for area improvements. Projects should not replace funding from the city budget or other sources. Priority is given to projects that leverage funding from other sources or fill a gap where other sources are not available. Projects should demonstrate cost sensitivity both in the short-term use of CPA funds and in the long-term maintenance or lifespan of the resource for which the funds are used. And priority is given to projects with a public sector or nonprofit applicant or co-applicant above private individuals or for-profit applicants. Yes.
So is the survey closed now?
As of today. So this reflects the public forum and the surveys that we had received as of when I drafted these goals and priorities. So since the survey was still open, I'm going to go back home. I received a stack of paper copies that I'm going to enter into the survey, and the Spanish will leave open, although we haven't had any Spanish survey responses yet. But we'll leave that open for another week because it was late getting launched. But we'll make any adjustments that we need to make to the goals and priorities if it seems as though, I mean, there is a consistent story that we hear throughout a lot of the public input. So I don't anticipate that it's going to be, that the additional survey responses are going to change what's in these goals and priorities, but we're open to making edits if we need to, if it seems to change.
So how many actual respondents to the survey do we have approximately? I know.
Yeah, so before I got a stack of paper copies today, we were at about 295. We were just shy of 300.
And that includes online.
Yes, that includes online and paper.
So we should probably be a little over 300
We'll be a little
now.
over 300 with the ones that I've received today. And, yeah, I would encourage people to take the Spanish survey. It'll be open for another week so that we can get some responses from that side of the community as well.
Has anyone checked with the library to see if they had any more?
I haven't checked with the library, and they'll be closed, yeah.
Yeah, well, we'll try to get them to you.
Okay, yeah. Well, you can enter them as well. I can send you a link so that you can enter the surveys into SurveyMonkey. It takes about 2 to 3 minutes per survey to put them in.
And here, you checked, everybody, Ryan, you checked here to see if there was any more?
Sure.
Yeah,
Yeah, see if there's any.
yeah. So the senior center possibly could have
Senior
some.
Center, those are the part of the ones I gave you.
Okay,
Senior Center and Women's Shelter.
okay, all right. So I haven't written, there are a few more pieces of the plan in addition to the preliminary findings report, the goals and priorities. The full plan will also have a description of all of the public process and stakeholder process that we undertook. And so we've already begun to draft a description of the forum, and once we close out the survey, we'll draft the survey description. So by the end of this month, I will be sending a complete plan with any input that you give me also taken into consideration, any edits and comments that you send me. I need those, I think, in about 2 weeks from now, so that we can incorporate those in the complete plan. And it always happens that although our process is limited time-wise by the grant cycle, that we need to complete this project as early in June as we can. The first time we put together the complete plan and I send it out, I assume that there will be additional edits needed. So we don't have enough time on this grant to have a long public comment period, which would be ideal. But I encourage you to share the draft pieces that I've already sent you to people who you feel need to have a chance to provide input, and send me back the comments within 2 weeks or within a month, and we'll be able to incorporate comments. I believe that I have a tentative date set in my mind of about around the 10th of June. I need to make it final, cut off any further edits on the plan and get it into production for you. So I began to read the goals and priorities. I don't need to read the entire document, but please comment and stop me if there's anything that you would like to talk about now. So the first of the program areas that we cover is open space and recreation. And we highlight the fact that you have an open space and recreation plan that is also actually just being wrapped up right now as well, so it's very fresh. So this provides, there's a wider planning process that's identified what your priorities are for open space and recreation planning, and some of that can be applicable to CPA funding. The goals I identified are to improve access to open space and recreation for all Holyoke residents, preserve natural resources and promote green infrastructure to enhance and protect neighborhoods, and to invest in open space and recreation resources that support economic and community development. And then there are two priorities. The way that and then some examples of the types of projects that might fit in those priorities, taken from things that people have talked about throughout the stakeholder and public process. When you have an application that you're considering, you'll consider, does it fit as a first priority or a second priority? Consider where it falls on this chain when you're thinking about how important it is to fund that project. So my first priority was to improve connectivity, access, safety, and function for open space and recreation resources. And the second priority is to support environmental and economic resiliency. And then you can see at the bottom on each program area, I've also included some potential examples of dual purpose projects that fit into more than one program area. These may or may not be relevant. I thought it was an idea that could be helpful, but you can push back. Yeah?
No, just one fairly obvious question, and I'm sure you've covered this somewhere, so I apologize. When you determined what was the first and what was the second priority, what made you decide that one was the more important?
The feedback that we've received through the public input process, for the most part. Also, the second priority is still a priority, because certainly in your open space and recreation plan and some of the other plans that I consulted in doing this, putting together these ideas, there's a need for supporting environmental and economic resiliency. It's no less a need, but we heard greater urgency among the people that we talked with about kind of the human functionality of your open space and recreation.
Great, thanks. I was just anticipating having to explain this over and over, so.
Yeah, I mean, it's good that you can.
Yes.
So first and second priority doesn't mean that the second priority is not a priority. It is. It's just that if you have to weigh the two projects relative to each other, this can help you to sort out where they fall. So the second program area, historic preservation. The goals I identified are to promote revitalization through restoration of the city's historic built environment, document the city's history through preservation of artifacts and documents, and enhance community identity through preservation of historic sites. And the first priority, this is a little bit, I think, much more clear-cut than the open space and recreation priorities. Your first priority are city-owned resources, and second priority are non-city-owned resources. And thirdly, affordable housing. Yes. Yes.
So did you just say that the first priority was city-owned resources?
City-owned, yes.
I was thinking about something else. The overall goals for CPA funding, number 2 seems to contradict that, and I'm not sure if there's some way of adding in something about like a priority. Number 2 for the overall goals is to facilitate directly or indirectly, and I don't see where like having a you guys to get into a situation where application for this awesome public building project and it like doesn't impact tax.
Yeah, I think my answer to that, and I'm speaking purely for myself here, and maybe this is something that should be clarified, would be that to the extent that you have an awesome public building that needs restoration, its restoration does contribute to the value of Holyoke property because, having a sound, beautiful building in a place obviously enhances the value of everything around it. Just like having crumbling buildings with giant red X's on them is bad for the value of everything around it.
Daphne, just so I can get your, if you're gonna, next time, yeah.
Actually, since we did invite Daphne to sit with us and help us with this entire process, I would move that we invite her to sit at this table and have a microphone and everything.
Sure.
Well,
Yeah.
or you could sit there and have a microphone, whatever works best for you.
If you want
I think she did, didn't she?
I'm just going to turn the microphone on and keep.
Okay, as long as you don't feel like a pariah over there.
Yeah. I don't.
Okay, that's a great question, and maybe it's something that either I can clarify or committee members can be prepared, like you were, to explain. So the number 2 under the overall goals includes directly through investment in taxable property or indirectly through improvements that enhance a neighborhood. And it may be, even in some cases, that a city-owned property could be improved and then privatized for another purpose, because you do have some surplus buildings that could be repurposed as another possibility. But do other people feel that there's a contradiction that needs to be smoothed?
No, I think Mimi pretty much answered it. When you improve the quality of life, you improve the quality of life. And the quality and the value of anything around it improves, I think.
Well, but I would also, if that's not a good enough answer, we should know and keep working on it.
Like,
So,
it
Okay.
says priority is given, but it doesn't exclude other projects or limit it because it's not contributing to the tax base either.
That's true.
It's a good point, though.
I guess I'd hate to think that people would not apply for these funds because they'd be worried that their project doesn't directly, I don't know. I mean, I agree with Mimi completely. Like, I think that's an appropriate explanation for it. And as long as the board sort of knows this, I think that's perfect. But I also just think, I don't want to discourage anyone from applying for these funds. You know what I mean? So that's...
Maybe there could be a clarification under, at the beginning, explanation that second priority is still a priority. It's not to discount the need for the things that fall at the bottom of the table.
yeah, I think there may be some room, once this is finalized, and maybe even to start thinking about it now, for some sort of narrative, plain language discussion of what we're doing and what the purposes are. That's like a sort of introduction to CPA application for dummies. Here's what this is about. Here are the general ideas. Do not be discouraged by X, Y, and Z, or if you don't have all of the qualities that seem to be called for in the overall goals section. And maybe even at some point asking a few potential applicants for feedback on that narrative so that we know where we're confusing people.
If I may, too, I think I would like to suggest that maybe we don't want to do that in too much of in a broad way, because we don't want people with projects that will never have a chance to be asking us for money, funding, just because they don't fall into what we're asking for. So, I mean,
Yeah, no, you want to be...
we want to encourage projects, and on the other hand, we don't want to encourage projects that wouldn't have a chance to come forward either, you know what
Yeah,
I'm
no,
saying?
you want clarity, but you don't want to be inaccurate.
Exactly, yeah.
Would item 2 read any differently if we just eliminated the words tax-based and maybe reworded it? Because we want projects to facilitate the growth of Holyoke. And then later on, you say comma, either directly through investment in taxable property or indirectly. And that way, it's less directly aimed towards increasing the tax base. It's mentioned there in that first parentheses, but
Is growth a bad word in Holyoke?
I
Not at all.
I consider growth to be economic growth or personal growth or recreational growth, like,
Well,
Because that, in some communities, that's a bad word. So without clarifying what kind of growth you want, you have to be cautious using the word growth.
and that was a very a great priority at the table I was sitting at, that they want projects that will increase the tax base. That was
That's
an
what I
economic
heard, yeah.
development.
That's not a phrase I've used before in these plans, but that is something that I specifically heard quite a bit in the forum. So I feel as though it's fair to include that, but maybe
Not
to
second.
emphasize,
Maybe
yeah,
not the second overall.
okay. Okay. So affordable housing. Okay, so we begin with a caveat explaining that we've heard that affordable housing is the lowest priority among the 3 program areas. In part, not that it's a tremendous need in Holyoke, but that is one area where you do already have a lot of resources that are being committed to affordable housing, whereas the other areas don't have, or have a lot more orphan projects for which funding isn't available. And you're required to spend funds on affordable housing. So what are some productive ways that CPA can provide for affordable housing while still meeting your overall objectives? So the goals are to improve social and economic integration through creating opportunities for home ownership, mixed income communities, and reducing blight in residential neighborhoods. Sustain the supply of affordable housing, in particular to accommodate seniors and people with disabilities, families, individuals, and first-time homebuyers. And support low and moderate income households in accessing housing that they can afford. So the priorities are first to improve neighborhoods and create affordable housing units. And second, to provide support for households to access affordable housing. So I'll let you look at and comment later on all of the project examples that I've included, and let me know if there are any that you'd like to change. So that covers the goals and priorities. Next, I'm going to look at the document that is the application packet. So this is what goes out to applicants, and maybe, as I think Mimi suggested, we could add a narrative encouraging people to apply if they think they meet the eligibility requirements, and the committee will determine how they align, or how well they align, or make a case for how well they align with the goals and priorities. You talked a couple weeks ago in my absence about the timeline, so I've filled in the projected timeline. Still room to edit those dates if you so wish. And then you've also seen before, but maybe haven't had a chance to discuss, the next couple of pages have instructions that explain the application and review process, each of the steps that was included on the year 1 timeline. Are there any questions about the steps on the year 1 timeline?
Do you think there's enough time to allow for like the historic preservation review for individual projects? I don't have a good sense of the Historic Commission and how often
So preferably, if there was an applicant who needed to go before the Historic Commission, they could do that at any time in the process, as long as they have the approval or the endorsement of the Historic Preservation, of the Historic Commission, by the time you make your recommendation. So you can, the applicant could indicate that they have an appointment to go before the Historic Commission, and that can be sufficient to determine their eligibility, and maybe even they can submit the application still pending. But before you can recommend them, you need to see that they've been endorsed by the Historic Commission.
Well, we could certainly reach out to the Historic Commission and get their opinion on that question of whether there is enough time. But, yeah, no, I take the point certainly that having a date pending takes care of a lot of this.
I think it would be really important that any committees that are going to have a direct role in the process, the Historic Commission, the City Council, and sometimes, in some cases, the Conservation Commission, where there will be permitting required for projects, understand this process and have understand what, have an overview of what CPA is, so that they know how their input is being used. I think that will smooth the process for both you and the applicants if there's a sense that you're working together with those committees. And then I'm flipping through the packet. I'm on the page that says project requirements, selection scoring criteria. And this page, I think you've also seen before. The scoring criteria were in the packet that you had from me a couple weeks ago. And these scoring criteria, alongside the goals and priorities, are going to be your tool for evaluating applications. So each there is no numerical score, so it's all kind of, you're looking at every project qualitatively. But you can use these to determine how well each application is meeting your expectations, and to be able to compare the, it's on this page, this is, you have it in the backwards version. So, you'll use these to compare multiple applications if it's a competitive process, or to determine whether an application is ready to go to be funded.
Bless you.
So all of these are going to be much more meaningful once you actually have applications in front of you. It's very theoretical right now, but look at it and let me know if you have comments.
Could you
Yes.
help me understand if I've got the right packet? I printed out both at the office.
So the one that you have is an earlier version that I had not yet put the dates in, but otherwise that was the only change I made.
So are these copies up here more recent than, or more?
Yes, this,
Okay, thank you.
you're welcome. I think that's the only change, is putting the dates on it. So it's stapled on the wrong corner. And then the rest of the packet is instructions for the applicants. So the application would have a first part and a second part. You see that in the application timeline. The eligibility determination forms. This is something you don't have to do, but it seems helpful to know ahead of time what's going to be in the process. This is sort of it doubles as a notification of their intent to apply. And so it gives you a chance to think about the applications and have them in your mind before people are preparing the full applications. Yes.
Yeah, it also struck me as worthwhile because it allows people who have projects that just aren't going to meet the criteria to either amend them or just withdraw before they've gone through a complete application, which is likely to be onerous and not worth it for somebody whose
Yeah.
project we just can't approve.
That's right.
So it seems like a very valuable step to me.
And where's the eligibility for determination form? Do we have that?
I believe it's after the matrix, yeah.
Oh, it's coming up, okay.
Yeah,
Okay,
it's-
that's fine.
So this page in your packet, this matrix from the Department of Revenue, this is your Bible. This tells you what is eligible. And it seems simple, but when you have applications in front of you, you'll keep coming back to this over and over, and you'll keep working with applicants. Sometimes a project may be eligible, but they describe it in a way that's not. And you need to show this to them and say, this is exactly the case we need you to make in your application so that it's demonstrably eligible. Or it may not be. And, you know, you can point to this to make the case for you, that it's not just your idea, but it has to fit this.
If someone, whoever's doing projects, if they don't do an eligibility form ahead of time and they just give us a project, is that something we have to insist that they do, or?
First, you're setting up this process, and it is to your benefit. I wish that I'd numbered these pages for you. I always, it's on the second page of the application packet, is under the instructions for the application and review process, under number 3, off-cycle applications. So every now and then, a project may come along where they have, there's an opportunity to acquire a piece of property. And when it comes to buying property, you can't wait for the funding cycle next year. You need to be able to make that, get your funding immediately. So or it may be that they've applied for funding and they weren't able to get into your process on your timeline, but they're driven by an external timeline that they would need an answer from you outside of your normal cycle. 2 examples that I've seen of projects that need to come in off cycle. So letting people know ahead of time that they can go through the off cycle process, you still want them to complete the eligibility form, complete the full application. You ensure that, you take first, if a project wanted to do an off-cycle application, they would communicate with your coordinator. Your coordinator would bring it to you, and the committee would take a vote as to whether to accept an off-cycle application. And then they do both parts of the application simultaneously and submit it, have a presentation, do the whole process, but on their timeline, not yours. So that it's just as transparent, and people know ahead of time that it's an option if they have to do that. But it's preferably used only rarely, and only because it's a high priority and it is driven by an external deadline, not just that they didn't get their act together. So we looked at the project eligibility determination form, so you have a chance to review the projects and then invite the applicants to submit a full application if they're eligible. And there are instructions for the full application. I asked, we met earlier today with the Office of Community Development, and I asked them if they can give us some feedback on this as well, as to whether there are additional questions that they would recommend that you add to your application to ensure that it is as thorough as can be, given that you don't have the funding to do due diligence. You need to make sure that the applicants have done all of their due diligence ahead of time. So these are subject to further comments from all of you as well. So that is all of the material that I prepared for you.
Okay. Any questions or concerns? Yes.
Question on the application review process.
Yes.
Step number 5 has something handwritten next to it. I can't.
Yes,
quite
I'm
make out.
sorry. So I gave this to Ryan Allen earlier today to make photocopies, and I had just penciled it in. So I just took a look at your ordinance and saw that your ordinance requires you to have a consultation with the mayor between making the recommendations and sending it to city council, or at the time of your making the recommendations. So I just put a note to myself to incorporate that into these instructions.
So it's consultation of the mayor. It's not
Right,
his
you,
approval to then
right,
go to
the
city
mayor's
council.
approval is not required, but just a consultation with the mayor is required.
Is that for every project? I'm on,
The mayor's approval is required on any city-owned property, if I understand it correctly.
Yeah. And
On the application.
it is, when they make this slate of recommendations, they need to run their recommendations by the mayor.
yeah,
Yeah.
that makes sense. I'm not looking at what Kip was looking at, so I was just trying
Oh,
to
okay.
make sure, like, every applicant didn't have to,
No,
you know.
no, that's not the applicant's
Yeah.
onus, that's the, although it is required that if there are any projects on city property, the mayor should know about it. You know, you run into bad press when you've got one party requesting funding for an approval, for example, of one that I've seen before, an applicant putting in a proposal for a new lighting bank at a sports field that doesn't currently have a lighting bank. And of course, we would have required that they get approval first, but the fact that the application was submitted before the mayor saw it meant that the public thought that there was a live, that there was a live proposal under consideration to put lights over an athletic field that they didn't have any prior notice about. So it made it look like it was farther along in the process than it actually was. It was just a proposal. And so I think that it's important that you give your city officials a chance to know what's being proposed before it gets released to the public. That's,
It would go to Parks, and then
Yeah.
the Parks would check with the mayor.
so you can let me know if you want to change who the chain of command is, but there really does need to be some official chain of command before an eligibility form is submitted on city property, so that projects are not released to the public that haven't been vetted, at least known about ahead of time.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes.
Anybody else?
I have a question. Was there any discussion, and I haven't been paying attention to every single meeting, so I'm sorry about that. But was there a discussion about the possibility of like a small grants streamlined application?
That was actually, I think very early on, we talked about the possibility of a small grants application, and I would recommend that it's something that you consider down the road, perhaps in year 2, you could add a small grants application. In fact, I could even offer an application form for small grants. But I have the feeling that for year 1, because you have so much to learn over the first year of this process, that it might add a layer of complication to include small grants in year 1. But you might collect input about how people feel about the small grants program and include it in year 2.
Yeah, if it isn't too much trouble to include, if you've got a basic application package for small grants, I think it would be worth seeing.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
No, I mean, a small grants applicant could still apply for funding through the application that we have here. But the specialized small grants application offers a streamlined process. Instead of the two-step, it's one step. Although the two-step has its advantage of having you in more communication with the committee and with the coordinator over a longer period of time. Whereas it seems to simplify it to have a small grants applicant only have to submit one form, but it is, it's to their benefit to spend more time in communication with you anyway.
Yeah, and, as you say, it may not make any sense until at least year 2, where everybody's learning the process. It would just be interesting to see what one looks like as compared to the full application.
Yeah.
I just had a look at Northampton's, it's for under $6,000 grants. And I guess what struck me most was the language that was used was a lot more accessible, I thought. And I feel like people who are applying for these small grants may just be, look at all the stuff that they have to go through. And I don't know if you could devise a small grant process that was a two-step process still, where you'd have the communication with the board, but the language was just like a little more accessible to people so that small community groups could, not feel like they had to write an entire financial sort of document to get a couple of $1,000s for whatever they want to do. So, I mean, that was my response to it.
Okay, well, I'll take a look at Northampton's and consider just drafting what the application could look like if you decide that you want to use it down the road.
Great.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Okay. One thing I did want to say that we're going to be discussing later on about having someone be our coordinator. And Marco took my qualifications. I don't know why he did that, but he took my, so I have to, I don't know if we'll be able to discuss that tonight unless someone else has those, that information, but yeah. So anyways, I'll have to get those from him, or I can print them out again, but I don't
Well,
have them.
maybe you can discuss, we'll talk about this when you come to your item 6 on your agenda. I have some thoughts about it.
Okay, all right, so we're all set on item 2. Let's move on to item 3, Mimi, about the rules. Any news on our rules?
Yeah, I had a useful discussion with our city solicitor after our meeting. He has some thoughts about the rules to date, and he's very enthusiastic about the CPA in general. And after we had talked for a while about things like the quorum requirements and open meeting laws and attendance at these meetings, he suggested that he and we might find it useful to invite him in to discuss the process with us and how the law department can be of help to us going forward. And that struck me as an excellent idea. And I would hope that it is the pleasure of this body to invite him and anyone else from the law department who wants to come and talk to us to come have a discussion with us at any meeting where it's convenient. Certainly we can't finalize the rules until we have the application materials anyway. Mm-hmm. And I think a brief delay so that we can get professional guidance on this is a reasonable price to pay.
Okay, so that's Paul Payer?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Is that the pleasure of the committee that we invite him in? We'll see if he can make our next meeting, and if not, the one after for sure, but, okay. Thank you.
Good idea.
Great. Anything else on that? Any questions? No. Okay, the fourth one is the website update, and that's me. I did invite the website, her name is, wait a minute here, let me find Joanne. Let's see here, let me find the thing. Anyways, we were going to invite her here tonight, the one that I spoke to you about at the last meeting. who was willing to do a website, oh, thank you, a website for us, a website development, but she wasn't able to make it tonight because she didn't get back to me. I didn't hear from her, but but in the meantime, today, we met with some department heads, myself and Mimi, and to go over, you know, what our future plans are about things and how they can help us. And they suggested that we not do our own private web design at this point in time anyways. They said that they are going to, specifically the Office of Community Development is going to help us to improve our web page on the city's website. That they are going to make sure that we have our own page, that it's more easily accessible and not have to go through all the things that people have to go through now to get there. And so they're going to help us do that for now. And it was suggested by the majority of them that we don't do our own website at this point in time. You know, we can just, if things don't work out, or if we see in the future that we do need to have our own web page, we can. But most cities and towns are on their city's website. And if people are looking for a city entity, a city board, they most likely, if they don't have any information about how to get there, they would go to the city to see if there is information there about the board. So, you know, I wanted to let you know that and see what your pleasure is, see if you agree with that at this point in time, and moving. Go
I just
ahead.
wanted to add that there were a couple of other recommendations. One was that you can get your own URL that points to the city's website.
Right.
So that you can give them, your web person had suggested some names.
Mm-hmm.
You could use one of those names, make that URL, and have it point to the city's webpage so that it makes one more easy way to find your information. And that you also might be able to use some help in creating graphics for the committee to use on your documents now and going forward.
Okay, yes. So I still am going to invite her to come to our if she can make our next meeting, hopefully, and help us out with those, that thing. When you say URL, that's just like a one-page website that would...
No, the URL is just the address. So she gave you some ideas like Preserve Holyoke or something like that, holyokepreservation.org.
Right, exactly.
So you could
Yeah.
use those, but instead of its own website, it points to your city website.
So we would use just an address.
Yeah.
She would set up an address for us all right.
Madam Chairman, are they on board to do this?